Eat less meat, buy fewer new clothes, travel less often. We must drastically reduce demand, we are told, to stop climate change. Well, that is at least according to a top UK scientist. So what will you give up to save our planet? Welcome to Roundtable. Hello from me, David Foster. We do face a big choice. Reduce demand for just about everything or face the climate consequences. That warning was issued by the UK government's top environmental scientists, but what are we prepared to actually say goodbye to?
The UK government has committed to be effectively carbon neutral by 2050. It's the first major economy in the world to make net zero emissions the law of the land. But to achieve this, the UK government's outgoing advisor on climate change says consumers have to help reduce demand. In a word, stop using so much. Sir Ian Boyd says it will take big lifestyle changes. Plane travel, for instance, contributes 2.5% of the world's carbon emissions, so we need to fly less. Meat production accounts for 14.5%, so we need to eat less of it. Clothing production accounts for 10%, so buy fewer clothes. But how easy is it to give up our spending habits? And can we reach this target without affecting economic growth?
Let us get the conversation going. With me at the round table today, we have Dr. Ralf Martin from the Growth Programme at the London School of Economics, also Imperial College. Gale here too, author and environmental campaigner, and Dr. Teresa Domenech, who's a lecturer in industrial ecology at University College London. Great to have you all with us. Jen, 2012, I think it was, you and your family gave up everything, pretty much everything for a year. Not food, obviously. I want to ask you, I mean, you look fantastic. You pushed the boat out. Did you buy new clothes just for this programme?
No. I don't think I can't remember the last time I bought new clothes. So the year we spent was buying nothing new, so buying things second-hand. So it's very much become entrenched.
What did it do to change your life?
It really changed, obviously it changed how we shop, how we made us much more thoughtful about what we consume. But I think, this sounds really cliched, but it kind of changed how I see my place in the world. I think when we're thinking about things like the climate crisis, it's really easy to think we're just one person, we're just one family. What difference can we make? And you see Joe Bloggs down the road, you know, spending millions. But it's actually the only person whose actions I can have any control over, and usually not even my kids, is mine. So I have to take responsibility for the impact of those choices.
What's it called, your blog? A Sustainable Life, and I know you put ish.
Yeah, so we're sustainable-ish, yeah.
Do you think it made much of a difference other than to you and your nearest and dearest?
Oh, I think I'd like to say it, yeah, I do think it made a difference because I decided to blog about the journey, and that opened up a whole world of sort of social media and connections, realising that we weren't the only people who were trying to make a difference. And I would like to say I do think it's influenced other people to do the same thing and to think a little bit about what they're consuming.
What difference has it made to the world?
What difference does it make to the world? Reducing consumption or just me making my choices?
Yeah, reducing consumption. We'll get this from everybody. What do you think?
That our consumption we've become so disconnected about the stuff that we buy and the food that we eat that we don't really even think hugely anymore, I think, about where it might have come from, who might have made it. We just buy quite unconsciously a lot of the time. So around 60% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from household consumption. So if we can reduce household consumption on a very personal level, that can have a really significant impact.
Ralf, I will come to you about the problems of restricting growth, which is what this is to some extent, because you're not buying anything new, in just a moment. But Teresa, let me ask you first of all, you talk about something called the circular economy rather than the straight line, the linear economy. Enlighten us on that.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting idea within this framework of reducing consumption. I think the way I see reducing consumption is reducing material consumption. It doesn't necessarily mean that we reduce our access to performance or to things, but it's a different way to consume that has lower material impacts or that has a lower
what is
footprint.
It really, though? How does it work?
Well, it's about the circular economy is about maintaining the value embedded in the materials. We have an economy, what you said, that is very linear. So we extract resources, huge amount of resources
What
from
we might
nature.
call the throwaway society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We use them for very little time and then we throw them away. But we don't actually retain the value of those materials. We create growth by just extracting, processing, and then disposing. Circular economy is a completely different way of doing things. We try to reduce our extraction, our consumption of materials by creating value, by retaining the function of those materials. And
So recover, reuse, remanufacture. I think
Exactly.
those are your 3 R's, aren't
yeah,
they?
yeah, exactly.
Fantastic.
There's even 9 R's, but I won't.
Well, you can tell us the other 6 in just a moment. I see a problem here, isn't it? Jen doesn't buy any new clothes for her or the kids. We all turn something that was once, let's say, a sheet on your bed into something that you can carry your shopping home in, etc., etc. We make nothing new. Nobody has a job to make something new. The economy doesn't grow. Fewer jobs.
I totally disagree. I mean, what they are basically talking about is how we can use our resources more efficiently. And that's essentially what growth always is. I mean, growth is not necessarily, I mean, it has happened in the recent past that we dig into our earth, we dig into our stock, which basically means, yes, we have faster growth now, but we will have slower growth in the future because we have extracted all the resources. And what gives us long-term growth is essentially be more economical with our resources, finding new clever ways of, with the same amount of wood, with the same amount of stone, produce more. And I mean, I would think of her as an innovator who sort of, thinks about new ways. I mean, the key problem I would see with it, I'm sort of, I don't think we can solve this if we sort of hope that, individuals sort of change their behavior in a massive way. I mean, this can give us some ideas, but that has then to translate into some, new systems, which make it very easy so that the behavioral change is minimal. But the effect on on being more efficient becomes big.
But do you see what I'm saying? I mean, what are there, about 30, 40, 50 shirts up there, okay? Let's say that shop sells twice that many in one day. If everybody changes their habits and they only sell one in one day, then the person who makes those shirts, or the people who make those shirts, are going to be reduced to just one person.
Yeah, of course, there will be transitions in the economy. Not everybody will be immediately very happy, but overall growth in the economy can only come from one place.
I get what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I mean, we now have a 500 horsepower car or whatever it is. But if you stop making a shirt, one day nobody's going to be wearing anything.
Well, they will
There's
wear
not a
something else.
replacement.
They
There's
will
not a
wear
replacement.
second-hand clothes, and the people who make shirts can then make, I don't know, new types of spaceships or something like that, or very clean, renewable power plants. Of course, not the same people. That is precisely the problem. If you know how to make shirts, then you probably cannot build a great solar power plant.
But we're
as for the economy
evolving.
as a
We're
whole-
evolving as a planet, and to
Yes.
stay alive as a planet, we have to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to transition from, lots of manufacturing jobs into whether there's more service-based jobs, so it's embracing, there's lots of potential for green jobs to come from a circular economy. So the guy who makes shirts could be repairing shirts, could be offering a service repairing shirts. There could be a whole industry around harvesting those materials that have been used to make the shirts to then make them into something else. And that's the whole point, that we keep these resources within the loop. And that we're using them in different ways.
It's called upcycling as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know because I have a daughter who upcycles clothes.
Yeah, exactly. And I completely agree with Jen. I think it's not about just saying, well, we will destroy the jobs of manufacturing shirts. I think it's creating value through retaining the value of those shirts. And how do you do that? For example, through repairing or having rental models for clothes, which are now quite well emerging, and we have a few startups in London that actually rent clothes, and then they have people that repair
Can
them,
you say that again?
remanufacture.
People rent clothes out, other than dress clothes, which you might hire for a wedding or a special occasion.
No.
You can rent
you
your
can,
jeans,
for example,
can't you?
jeans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can rent a pair of
jeans.
socks.
I don't know that you'd want to do it with
socks.
socks.
I'm not sure, but you can also sweaters. There's a few companies that are actually now starting a business model is about renting the clothes. At the end of or when you no longer want to wear that shirt, you bring it back to the shop, you get some money back, and then that shirt can be repaired or remanufactured, or some of the fabric retained for other purposes.
You are the practical person in this, if I must say so. You two are the theorists, but I want to ask you, Ralf and then Teresa, are you seeing more and more people buying into this argument?
The argument that they should upcycle.
That you can still grow at the same time as using less?
Overall, as the globe as a whole,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, this is the only thing that has ever driven growth is new innovation. Innovation where you make things more efficiently. Where out of a gallon of oil now we get much more than we got before, and out of wood we get much more, and we get much more out of steel than we did before. That's what's driving growth. Of course, there are episodes where growth is driven by other stuff, by movements of people or building up capital. Well, if you destroy the whole, as we have seen after the Second World War, if you destroy a lot of the capital stock, then just rebuilding that will just generate a lot of nominal growth. But then in the long term, what drives the economies is that sort of thing, making things more efficient.
We're talking about an extra 1 billion or 2 billion people in the next 30 years. Well, will there be enough for them to do if the other half of the population, or the remainder of the population, is actually involved in upcycling, recycling, remanufacturing, developing new ideas? We've got to be pretty quick about this, haven't we?
You could also flip that, couldn't you? And you could say that will there be enough resources to sustain an extra 1 or 2 billion people in 30 years' time, regardless of whether we've grown or all that kind of thing. And I think that actually we need to start redressing, do we prioritise economic growth, or do we prioritise people's well-being and making sure that people have enough to eat and drink and clothe themselves?
On a practical level, how would you advise? Was it a shock to the system?
Buying nothing new?
Yeah. I assume the food was new.
And the pants. Not as hard as I thought it was going to be. I think some people grow up very much in that, everything is bought from charity shops and things, and we weren't particularly like that. So, but actually just stopping and taking a look around, you realise how much abundance there is of stuff, and I guarantee you can find. You might need to put your patient pants on for a bit, but you can find pretty much 90% of what you need or want buying nothing new.
And what about the rest of the family? Were you the evangelist, and it took a while?
I came up with the idea, and I think I do tend to have quite a lot of amazing ideas, and my husband just sort of nods and waits for the next amazing idea to come along and me to get distracted. So, and I think he just sort of thought, well, I'll just keep quiet and wait for her to get bored of this, and then kind of reluctant. Well, he realised we were saving quite a lot of money as well, so that helped to get him on board.
Did they buy into it, the rest of the family?
Well, the kids were 4 and 2, so they had not very little choice, really, in the matter.
So if it was 4-week-old cabbage for them, it really didn't matter?
I don't think I ever served up 4-week-old cabbage.
They wouldn't know the difference. You've probably got some really lovely stories to tell about your journey in this one. But I want to ask both of you two. I can see it in the long term, but it's the short and the medium term, particularly the short term, that is going to be an issue, isn't it?
I think it's going to be an issue, especially because we have a system that actually doesn't work as a circular system. So even if you want to, for example, now with plastics, which is out there and everyone is worried about plastic, but the solution is not just to shift to another material and just to shift the burden from oil to, I don't know, consuming water or consuming pesticides, that we need to grow the bioplastics. So it's about rethinking the system in which we work and thinking, do we actually need so much packaging material, and why do we need that? It's because we have extremely longer and more complex flows of materials, food coming from different parts of the world. Then maybe having a more local supply of food could be something that we should try to aim to in the future. But how do we do that in the shorter term? How do we actually encourage that to happen? It's quite difficult, and we need policies to actually create a system that is conducing behavior towards that.
Do you think it becomes a sort of snowball, and it gathers momentum as it goes on with people like Dan and others following on from what you do, and that would then help this transition?
I think that's definitely something that is happening on the ground. We see people changing behavior, but we also see companies changing behavior, new business models emerging. But I think we also need the push from the government to introduce ambitious policies to cut down material consumption. And I say material consumption, not necessarily access to goods and access to services and performance of products.
You wanted to say something?
No, I tend to agree with all of this, but I'm a bit worried about, when I hear, we need to focus on the local. This is a global problem, right? And for instance, the plastic, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff we can do better here, but for instance, most of the plastic pollution at the moment that is in the oceans, that comes from poor waste management in sort of poorer countries. And sort of if you want to really do something extremely quick about that, we should, rather than worry too much about things here and spend a lot of money here, maybe the UK should fund some waste system in an African country or something like that, right? So that there's sort of a bit of the danger also when we talk about the net zero target we have now.
I was going to get onto that in just a second. This is net zero emissions by 2050.
Yes.
In the UK, when we talk about the speed at which these things can be done, and the priorities, A, is it right to say this country, the UK, will set an example and do that? And secondly, is it possible without damaging what already exists there?
It's very hard to predict these things. I'm sure it's possible. In principle, it might take a bit longer, a bit shorter. But again, if we just reduce emissions here and pat ourselves on the shoulder, then we haven't really solved the problem, because we already, we have reduced emissions that are generated here, but we haven't reduced emissions that are consumed here, that are embedded in the stuff we are consuming and buying. And so if the UK is now totally focused in the next 20 years on this net zero target, and they might even achieve it, we might miss the global target, where we have to, I think the role the UK can have here, in particular in countries like the UK, not only the UK, is to focus on innovation, creating the new technologies that help everybody, new energy generation technologies in particular, but also maybe waste processing technologies, and maybe clever systems of. It doesn't have to be necessarily always high tech. It can be, maybe we need a better recycling system or sort of an upscaling system. And if we develop these, but in a way that it's attractive for other countries to import them.
Doable, though.
I think it's doable. And also, some of what our research shows is that you mentioned the short-term versus long-term problems. So in the long term, it's very clear. Part of doing something about the environment, the way economists see this, is that we want to actually ensure long-term growth. It's not an either-or. That is, in the long run, if you don't do this, and everything breaks apart, then that is a very negative shock to the economic system as well.
But isn't it a bit like an expanding universe? Things cannot go on growing forever. Therefore, there has to be a limit to growth. Sorry, we're getting into a different discussion sort of here, really, aren't we?
You can, if you have the right technology, you can make with the same tree. If you build a house with a tree, I don't know, you can make it very clunky, or you have an engineer who thinks about static and that sort of thing, and makes with the same material 2 houses using less material. So you can grow the economic value you get out of it. You just think, you need to make more widgets, but you just need to create more services for people. At the end of the day, we don't want to necessarily have a heavy house. We just want to have a house that prevents us from getting wet.
What about transition? Jen, and you come in with some personal stories on this. How about help for those businesses that are, rather than just as an individual, are deciding it's time to make this change, that they want to go towards the 2050 target, they want to reduce their emissions, they want to become more environmentally friendly. They are getting very little at the moment, are they? Mm-hmm. They need help.
They need help. I think the system at the moment is not made for those kind of business models. So they are facing a number of obstacles, a number of barriers, including regulatory barriers that need to be removed. And you also need to put the right incentives to companies to move towards those kind of business models. So they definitely need help. And I don't think the change will happen on its own organically from the companies. I think we have seen examples of very successful companies that are very innovative and are doing that, but I think that's the minority of them. It's only a niche market. So I think to see the mainstream companies doing a big transition towards circular economy, they need to have
There is a danger here
incentives.
too, as well, isn't there? That as more and more people follow your sort of example, and more people think, well, what you two are saying is sensible, there will be one or two people out there exploiting resources just so they can make hay while the sun shines, because one day they're not going to be able to.
Yeah, and I think there's sectors in the economy that are actually very tied to extraction of resources. We can think of the mining sector and how the mining sector transition to a circular economy, and that's quite an interesting debate, and they are actually thinking about it.
Before we get a generation of Jans here, we need to, or the authorities, need to put the brake on those that are the exploiters first, don't they?
I think one main
to thereby encourage people to transition.
Yeah, and I think, as Ralf was saying, it's quite a global system, and we need to be aware of what's happening in other parts of the world, because that's affecting us and it's affecting our emissions, because most of our emissions will be embedded in products. Even if we, for example, in buildings, we have seen a huge amount of energy savings in the performance of buildings in the last years. It has been amazing, but actually we still are consuming more materials per capita. And why is that? Because we are also importing products from other parts of the world that might not be using the most efficient methods. And those embodied carbon in the products, or that carbon that is embodied in the products we consume, is something that we don't have the tools right now to measure it very well. So we don't actually know how much carbon we are actually consuming, because we are consuming things that have been produced in other parts of the world with different technologies and different efficiencies.
Isn't there a case in this, Jan, you in particular, of sort of, there are far too many cars on the road, get rid of them, except for mine. You know, how do you get people to follow the example and become deniers?
I mean,
themselves?
I'm a big fan. You mentioned the ish, and that's
sustainable-ish.
So that's where I come from. I think that I agree with you, you know, like, if I was to say, right, you've got to go from where you are now to giving up flying, giving up your car, you've got to be vegan, you've got to source, you know, sustainable fabric for your clothes and all. People aren't going to be there. If you go, actually, you know, let's have a look at your food waste, or can you just go without your coffee cup for, you know, can you use a reusable? And it's getting people started on that journey, making them feel like it's doable, and that, you know, just that one step, it starts to create this mind shift. And like you said, we don't need a better type of disposable coffee cup. We need to move away from disposable coffee cups. We don't need better fast fashion. We need to move away from fast fashion. But it's trying to bring people along with the journey rather than kind of say, you've got to go from here to here.
Let's ask you two. You are the eggheads, if you like, when it comes to this sort of thing. Well, you think about it and you work it out as economic models. On a personal level, let me ask you, Ralf, how much has your life changed towards sustainability in the last 3 or 4 years? At all?
I think it got worse because I had kids. So suddenly you need a car and things like that. But you know, I think there's a lot of focus on these individual things, and what is sort of missing, or where there has been a decline in recent years, is the consciousness. You know, we need things like carbon taxes. We need government intervention to have the right signals, which then leads to better systems. And
so it must be multi-pronged. It has to come from all sorts of different directions.
It has, and because it's very complex, we don't know what is the best way of doing it. So we need to get the signals right so that then people can find, okay, if it's that costly, maybe I rather walk or I rather cycle. And I think you know, there's a lot of you know, advertisements, a lot of campaigns on, or maybe you could maybe walk a little bit, but there is not so much about, you know, maybe you should campaign or vote for parties or something like that that have this in their program. I mean, an interesting thing.
We only have a limited amount of time. You'll have to throw that one at me afterwards. So I want to put the same question to you, Teresa. Have you changed your approach to life because of what you've heard in the last few years?
Yes, definitely. I think I'll try to consume things that I know have a lot of material embedded in them and has a lot of potential environmental damage that has happened not necessarily on the product itself, but once the product was made or the materials were extracted. So trying to move to products that are have a lower footprint in the environment. So I think that's something that I do on personal basis, and that, to a certain extent, because those products tend to be more expensive, I guess part of my income is
but do you
to those inputs,
think,
and therefore I consume less, definitely.
is it not perhaps just something that is fashionable, a trend, and it will go away?
I don't think so. I mean, we are experiencing very clear signs of pressure in the environment. We have limited resources, we have a growing population, and we need to get very smart about how we use our resources if we want to maintain our current levels of welfare. So if we want to maintain this towards the future, we have to continue this and accelerate that transition. And
Thank you, each and every one of you, so much. At least the conversation is going, and that's presumably what you decided to do, other than just find out what it was like for yourself.
Yes.
Jan, you decided that the conversation needed to be shared with lots of other people, which is what we've been doing today. Ralf, Jan, Teresa, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for watching this edition of Roundtable. I hope to have your company next time. I'm David Foster. For now, goodbye.